Hello, this is Liz, Derry Public Library's resident film nerd and one of the reference librarians at the reference desk. And I'm welcoming you today to Director Day, in which I'm going to talk about probably one of the most recognizable directors today, Spike Lee. You probably know him via the Spike Lee joint. Um, or the colorful suits that he wears to the Oscars, if everyone saw the purple suit this year. So we're going to do a little bit of background on him. He was born in 1957 in Atlanta, Georgia. His mother was a literature teacher and his dad was a musician. So he obviously has art in the family. And he went to Morehouse College, which is an HBCU or a historically black college/university. And he got his MFA from NYU's Tisch School. So he's for him, film has been a lifelong passion. He was inspired by actually older films like from the 50s, like Facing the Crowd and On the Waterfront, and early Martin Scorsese efforts like Mean Streets. And he pretty much like while he was a student, he started making student films and independent features. He really hit the ground running in terms of being a filmmaker. His first film was in the mid 80s, and it was a kind of a romantic comedy, he put it a sexy romantic comedy called She's Gotta Have It. And his next film was School Days, which took place on an HBCU, and that became a cult hit. But the film that kind of propelled him into the limelight was his breakout hit Do the Right Thing, which was nominated for 2 Oscars, one for Danny Aiello for Best Supporting Actor and one for Original Screenplay, which it did not win. And he went on to have mainstream success in the early into the end of the 90s with movies like Malcolm X, the biopic with Denzel Washington, the romantic comedy Jungle Fever, which explored interracial relationships, movies like He Got Game, and pretty much most of his movies, with a few exceptions, discuss race relations in America, usually currently, although sometimes he'll make period pieces. And he will branch out and sometimes make more, I don't want to say mainstream, but he'll make, I guess, more like popcorn blockbuster type films. He made Inside Man with Denzel Washington. He did make a great period crime film in 1999 called Summer of Sam, which didn't really get a lot of attention when it came out, but it's gotten a lot of reevaluation, and I would definitely recommend seeing it. And The 25th Hour with Ed Norton, which was filmed in New York, one of the first movies filmed in New York post 9/11. And so, again, why is he important? He focuses on the Black experience. And if you look at the breakdown of a lot of directors, most of them are white men. And so Spike Lee was one of the first directors to really kind of not only get mainstream success, but get mainstream success focusing on issues that affected the Black community. Some of his other films like Get on the Bus, this is very small feature film. It's just about a bunch of older men trying to go to the Million Man March. The satirical comedy Bamboozled, which tackles blackface. That was one that got an interesting reception when it premiered, but it's now in the Criterion Collection. The movie Girl 6, which is very interesting in light of the Me Too generation. It's about a woman who is trying to make it in Hollywood, and the very underseen Miracle at Santa Ana, which is about a Black soldiers in World War II. That actually got him in a slight exchange with Clint Eastwood when it came out, because Spike Lee criticized him for releasing not one but 2 films about World War II, Flags of Our Fathers and Letters from Iwo Jima, and goes, you didn't even have one Black soldier in either of your movies. And he, though the ranks were segregated, I mean, he was right in his larger point where it's like, you see all these movies about World War II, but how many times do you see that from a Black perspective? So that is why Spike Lee made that movie. He's also made a lot of really good documentaries that I would recommend seeing. The first is Four Little Girls, which is about the church bombing. If you're a fan of people like Bernie Mac and Cedric the Entertainer, he actually directed the comedy concert film, The Original Kings of Comedy. Also, 2 great movies about the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. The first is When the Levees Broke, and the second is If God is Willing and the Creek Don't Rise. Both are absolutely great films, even if Katrina has unfortunately kind of faded from the American consciousness. So why is he important? Well, if you can't guess, It's the fact that he not only discusses race relations in America, but confronts it. And he'll also confront issues within the community as well. One of his more recent films, Chi-Raq, confronts gang violence in Chicago, and it's actually about women in Chicago kind of performing a modern day Lisa Strada, so gang violence will stop. Some criticism about his films would be, and I actually agree with this, sometimes his female characters aren't that great. I do think Girl 6 probably deserves some revisiting. I actually think that's a stronger film than people remember. But some of the female side characters in his movies can come across as a little one note. I mean, some people are just better at writing their own gender than others. But overall, that's not a reason to not see his movies. Most recently, one of his biggest movies in years, did really well at the Oscars, did really well at the box office, was BlacKkKlansman, and I actually think that's one of his best movies in years. And it really was a return to form. Like, we haven't seen him at this level cinematically probably since Malcolm X. And so if you haven't seen the movie, it's about a young Black man named Ron Stallworth who joins a police force and actually infiltrates the KKK. And of course, you have to see the movie to see how that happens. Obviously, there are some things that are changed and added for dramatic effect because it is a movie. But its overall works both as kind of a crime movie, but also as a larger commentary on where we are in this country. He makes a lot of lines, draws a lot of lines from past rhetoric to rhetoric in the 70s when it's supposed to take place to rhetoric from now. And one of the best scenes in the movie is a scene where we see Harry Belafonte playing a man discussing the lynching of Jesse Washington. That took place in 1916. And he's discussing it in relation to the 1915 film, D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation, which that is a film that has a very special place in film history. It is a film that revolutionized film editing techniques, filmmaking techniques, and overall narrative film. But it is also infamous for being extraordinarily racist and popularizing these very harmful stereotypes. So we have Harry Belafonte talking about how this film inspired violence towards a man, and you have it intercut with scenes of a Klan meeting watching Birth of a Nation and happily cheering on the actions in that film. And it's interesting because Spike Lee is not only looking at Birth of a Nation as just this is a film that has a bad history. He's looking at it as this is almost the birth of my art form. And once upon a time, the art form that I love was used to oppress people who looked like me. So it's a very good, it's a good scene that shows kind of a sort of Spike Lee kind of coming to grips with the past, not only of America, but of the art form that he loves so much. And BlacKkKlansman on a larger note is interesting. So that year it was kind of going head to head at the Oscars with Green Book, and Green Book was a very big crowd-pleasing film, kind of on the level of Driving Miss Daisy. And there were a lot of people who weren't really happy when Green Book won, and one of them included Spike Lee, who actually just walked out of the ceremony. And I kind of support his pettiness on that. But it's interesting to look at these two side by side because movies like Driving Miss Daisy and Green Book, they have this very well, if we all just get along, everything is solved. BlacKkKlansman, and I think Spike Lee overall as both a person and a filmmaker, he sees a lot of these problems and these tensions as not just disagreements that we can solve by talking to each other. He sees them as unfortunately baked into our society, and we are going to have to do a lot of change to actually solve any of these problems. And, that's not as uplifting of a message, unfortunately, both for regular viewers and for Oscar voters. But, the point of art sometimes isn't just to entertain. The point of art is to make a message. And that is what Spike Lee tries to do. He not only tries to tell stories of the experiences of his people, of Black people, he also tries to tell the story of America and the fact that, yes, there are still problems to this day. Where would I say to go from a starting point? Well, I think the best would probably start with Do the Right Thing. That is available on the Criterion Collection. It was actually added to the National Film Registry a few years ago. Also, his biopic Malcolm X is available to stream on Netflix, and some of his films via add-ons on either Prime or Hulu. Again, I would watch Girl Six. It's one of those not well received when it came out, but in the lens of 2020, after looking at Me Too and how women are treated in the Hollywood industry, I think it's a very interesting film. I would also say check out School Days, and I would say check out Four Little Girls and Get on the Bus. And of course, his Katrina documentaries, When the Levees Broke, and If God is Willing and The Creek Don't Rise. I hope you get to check out at least one of these movies. Thank you for joining me today, and I'll see you tomorrow with What's on Netflix.